The Israeli response to the ballistic missile attack of October 1st has occurred, with a precision strike on 20 targets in Iran using over 100 attack, reconnaissance, and refueling aircrafts. It was the most complicated operation that the Israeli Air Force has ever carried out so far from home. And it was a complete operational success, with all the targets destroyed and no Israeli aircraft lost. Iran's vulnerability has been exposed, and a knife has been plunged into the heart of the Ayatollah regime. But Israel is already preparing for the next step in this campaign, knowing that an Iranian response is likely, but also knowing that we have complete air superiority in the skies over the Islamic Republic. Iran also knows this, and they are desperately trying to play down the Israeli strike and also claiming to have intercepted almost all the Israeli missiles, but the truth is impossible to conceal. Meanwhile, the reports emerged Sunday morning that Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei is reported to be very ill, and his son is already being groomed to be the next Supreme Leader, although there are many in the regime who are worried about his ability to take on the role. In Lebanon, the IDF continued to fight over the weekend, taking some losses but also inflicting serious damage on Hezbollah. One of the most dramatic results of the weekend's activity was the demolition of a massive underground complex of tunnels and bunkers that Hezbollah had craved out of the base of the mountain. This complex was found by the IDF under an ordinary-looking village, but it was stuffed filled with weapons and equipment meant to serve as a base for an invasion into Israel. The IDF estimates that Hezbollah spent 15 years building this complex, but on Saturday morning, the IDF used about 400 tons of explosives to demolish it in just a few seconds, and it will never again be available to Hezbollah to use it for its intended purpose of capturing the north. The explosions were so large it triggered earthquake alerts in the Galilee, which gave the system a good test, even if it did frighten some people. We got to visit this complex shortly before it was destroyed, and we'll talk about that later on. But first, we'll take a look at recent events in the Gaza Strip, and we'll also get some expert analysis from TBN Israel's senior analyst, Mati Shoshani. We've got a lot to talk about today, so let's dive into the details. I'm Yair Pinto, and this is your Boots on the Ground report about what is happening in Israel on the 387th day of the war against Hamas Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen, and all the Shiite militias in Iraq and Syria, all of which are acting under the authority of Iran, which is the head of the axis of evil in the Middle East. Just before we dive into all the details about the Israeli attack on Iran, I would like to ask you to take a second and find the subscribe button and press on it so that you will never miss another episode of Boots on the Ground. We start more than 1,500 kilometers away from Israel in the middle of the night between Friday and Saturday, exactly 25 days after the ballistic missile attack from Iran. At 2 a.m., the first reports began to be published in Iran about the echoes of explosions, signaling to the entire world that the Israeli response had begun. Let's take a broader view into the events, and then we'll take a much closer look at some of the details. The initial phase of the operation was, of course, the planning, which has been going on for years. On Friday evening, the pilots and the crews of the aircrafts who would be carrying out this mission were briefed. The aircrafts were fueled and armed, and they began to take off. The strikes began a few hours later and lasted for 3 hours, coming in 3 waves, with dozens of jets firing missiles at military compounds, air defense systems, missile production facilities, and surface-to-surface missile launchers in the Tehran districts, as well as in the Khuzestan and Ilam districts in the west of the country of Iran. According to the New York Times, the attack was on 20 different targets, including strategically vital parts of Iran's ballistic missile program. But the regime in Tehran is trying to downplay the importance of the strikes, even as they received warnings from the United States and other major powers not to respond. As mentioned, the first wave began at 2 a.m. Israel time with reports of the echoes of explosions in Tehran and also in Syria and Iraq, which led to the closure of their airspace. According to the reports, in this wave, the air defense systems in all three countries were heavily damaged to allow freedom of action for the Israeli planes to continue the attack. This will also be very helpful in any future attacks Israel might have to make. However, in the early hours of Saturday morning, as the reports were just beginning to emerge, it was not clear what had happened. Frightened residents of Tehran and other Iranian cities heard the explosions and began to run out into the streets. Rumors began to circulate that Tehran's international airport might have been damaged because the Israeli aircraft deliberately activated the defense systems there and then evaded them to show the Iranian military what it was capable of. A short time later, at around 2:30 a.m., the IDF spokesman officially confirmed that the IDF is accurately attacking military targets in Iran.
In response to months of continuous attacks from the regime in Iran against the State of Israel, right now, the Israel Defense Forces is conducting precise strikes on military targets in Iran.
At this point, the Iran regime switched its focus to damage control, trying to frame the narrative about what was happening to minimize damage to its public image. One way they tried to do this was by telling an obvious lie that the explosions that people had heard were simply the sounds of incoming Israeli missiles that were being intercepted and destroyed by the Iranian air defense systems. At that point, everyone thought that the attack was over. Until almost 4 a.m., the major media outlets were reporting that it was unclear what had been hit and how bad the damage might have been, with some taking note that Syrian military authorities were reporting that Israeli airstrikes hit military sites in its center and south. But then, reports began to emerge of more attacks in Iran, along with videos showing the failure of attempts to intercept incoming Israeli missiles. That's probably because at this point, the first wave of Israeli attacks had already destroyed all the radar stations meant to track incoming missiles and launch interceptors to destroy them. And this time, the incoming missiles were coming to destroy Iranian surface-to-surface missile production facilities. An Israeli source privy to the details said that the intelligence brought by the Mossad in this incident is science fiction beyond imagination in an extreme way. The damage was precisely done to factories that produce surface-to-surface missiles, so that the damage to Iran would be particularly significant. This is accurate 16-digit intelligence, full reference on a factory that is not replaceable. The Air Force hit this target precisely. It did not hit near the factory or approximately near the factory. It hit the factory. It was later reported by the New York Times that the second and third waves of the attacks ended at around 5 a.m. Then, at 6 a.m., the IDF announced that all Israeli aircraft had returned safely to their bases, bringing what it called Operations Days of Repentance to a successful conclusion.
I can now confirm that we have concluded the Israeli response to Iran's attack against Israel. We conducted targeted and precise strikes on military targets in Iran, thwarting immediate threats to the State of Israel. The Israel Defense Forces has fulfilled its mission.
I have a few thoughts of my own to share with you about what we've just seen. To start with, Operation Days of Repentance will join a long list of legendary Israeli military operations that will be studied by other militaries around the world for decades to come. We can call this the onion method that Israel has now used to blind the eyes of Iran and also embarrass Russia. This is because the Russian S-300 air defense system is what the Iranians have been using for the past few years, and it was supposed to defend the airspace over Tehran and other Iranian cities. But the Israelis using the most up-to-date American-built and Israeli-enhanced aircrafts and missiles, completely overwhelmed this Russian-built system. The S-300 is supposed to be one of the most advanced systems of its kind in the entire world. On paper, it is capable of shooting down incoming aircrafts, cruise missiles, and ballistic missiles at a range of 200 kilometers and at an altitude of 27 kilometers. However, the Israeli Air Force just showed the entire world that these Russian-made systems are not as amazing as they advertise to be. The IDF, under the command of the Chief of Staff Herzi Halevi, operates from the head and not from the stomach. The IDF does not attack for the sake of attack or just to make some kind of point. It acts in a calculated manner, and with every attack it carries out, the way is paved for possible future attacks and operations, should the political echelon decide that they are necessary. With all that in mind, we can see that the IDF peeled off another layer of the onion on Saturday morning, preparing itself for the next step by severely damaging Iran's air defense capabilities. And by the way, some of those capabilities were set up in Iraq and in Syria, close to Israel's borders. Severe damage was also done to Iran's ability to produce and launch ballistic missiles and UAVs. This sends a powerful signal to those who have not yet learned Israel's method of operation about the next assets that the IDF will deny to Iran if it continues to act against Israel. Iran is beginning to realize that in the last 24 hours it suffered a blow that can be compared to the beeper and walkie-talkie attack on Hezbollah. That attack marked the beginning of the dismantling of Hezbollah, and now everyone knows it. With all of this in mind, the leadership of Iran might have to sit down and reconsider some of their choices and the plans that they've made for themselves and their many regional proxies. In any case, the IDF is ready to completely annihilate the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps if the Iranian leadership makes more bad decisions in the days ahead of us. At this point, I would like to invite you to visit our website at tbnisrael.com/news to read in-depth articles and partner updates on what is happening in Israel, so that you can connect to the truth of what is happening in this region and unite in prayer. Speaking of updates, sources told the Saudi El-Sharaq Al-Awsat news portal over the last 24 hours that an Iraqi mediator delivered an American message to Iran before the Israeli attack, including information about the red lines that Israel will not cross. The sources confirmed that Iran understood from the message that Washington made an extraordinary effort to reduce the Israeli response to a level that would not allow a deterioration into a larger conflict in this region, and accordingly would not allow the Iranians to further violate the rules of the conflict. The matter stopped at this point, at least at this stage of the conflict. The sources added that Washington sees the scope of the Israeli response as a rare opportunity for Iran to avoid risks that cannot be controlled or measured. However, Iran stated on Saturday that it had the right and the duty to defend itself in response to the attack. That having been said, it is assessed that Israel has destroyed Iran's air defense capabilities, meaning the S-300 missile batteries and the radars. According to foreign publications, in the previous targeted attack, in which only 3 missiles were used, one of these batteries was destroyed, which was stationed in Isfahan. If this is true, then Iran now is exposed to attacks by the Israeli Air Force without a significant defensive capability. We will now turn it over to TBN Israel's senior analyst Mati Shoshani to take a closer look at Israel's strategy and to find out what was hit in Tehran that has the Ayatollah regime so worried.
Yes, Yair, may this be a blessed week for us all. I'll start with a breakdown of the details published so far by the foreign press and by Israeli officials. But let's just clarify and say that the facts still remain murky. Earlier today, information was released according to which, among other things, long-range missile production sites, a plant for the development of UAVs, and missile launch bases were all attacked. And it was stated that Israel achieved its goal, in retaliation to Iran's previous attack early in October. It was also reported that in the second wave of attacks, Israel intended to destroy a critical component in Tehran's long-range missile production process, and specifically 12 fuel mixers that are a critical component of Iran's ballistic missile program were destroyed. These facilities were used to produce solid fuel for long-range ballistic missiles, and their destruction severely damages Iran's ability to renew its missile inventory. According to the source privy to the details, this plant, which is defined as the backbone of the Iranian missile industry, has been rendered completely out of action for now. An estimated 20 solid fuel mixers were destroyed in this attack, the cost of each of which is estimated to be at least $2 million. And if you run the numbers, that is a substantial amount of money. Israeli sources said that this was a highly sophisticated equipment that Iran is unable to produce on its own, but must purchase from China. With all the problems China's manufacturing base is currently suffering from, some analysts estimate that it could take up to 12 months for this equipment to be replaced within Iran. That is an incredible amount of time for this gear to be offline, and a serious blow to the Iranian regime. Now, meanwhile, it was also noted by the Saudi media portal Ilaf that Israel also targeted a factory that produces solid fuel for the Khaybar and Qassam ballistic missiles, the same models that were launched at Israel on October the 1st. Sources familiar with the industry told Ilaf News that it will take at least 2 years for the plant to return to full operation, and Iran's ability to produce missiles has been severely damaged by this recent attack. According to the same Israeli sources, it was also noted that 4 S-300 air defense batteries were attacked in this operation, which were in strategic locations and protected Tehran and its nuclear and energy facilities. Additionally, a factory for the production of drones was attacked, and a symbolic attack was carried out on a facility in the city of Pilchin. The city of Pilchin might sound familiar because this is where in the past activity for the research and development of nuclear weapons was carried out by the Iranian government. I'd frame it this way. If Iran decides to attack Israel in response to last night's attacks, it risks a much stronger action with a weakened air defense capability that leaves it highly vulnerable to future Israeli Air Force attacks. Also, it must be stressed that this was not a preemptive attack. This is a strategic strike and proof that Israel is not intimidated by Iran. Iran's regime would like its foreign and domestic enemies to continue to be intimidated by it, and they're trying hard to hide the extent of the damage they've just suffered. The reality is exactly the opposite. Satellite imagery of the sites that were hit has surfaced throughout the last day and on Sunday, which makes the Iranian attempts to hide the extent of the damage nearly impossible. This satellite imagery reveals some incredible information. It confirms that 3 buildings and a warehouse were destroyed at the Pilchin base, which was previously used for the development and manufacturing of nuclear weapons, and 2 more at the Khujir site, which was in the process of expansion. The buildings that were destroyed were used to manufacture ballistic missiles, but a nuclear expert said that additional photos, which have probably not yet been revealed, also show damage to a building that was previously assumed to be connected to the Iranian nuclear weapons program. And this is some big news. There is no solid information yet to suggest that Iran has yet resumed its efforts to produce the nuclear warhead it's been working on. But if the reports that the Pilchin facility was attacked are true, the goal seems to have been to thwart Tehran's ability to carry out tests that would advance it in the production of the bomb itself, if and when it decides to push forward with the development. And at least, or at the least, it would set the program back. The Iranian regime's trouble does not end with the Israeli attack. On Sunday morning, yet another threat to the stability of the Islamic regime has come to light. The New York Times published a story claiming something incredible, that Iran's Supreme Leader, 85-year-old Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, is in very poor health, and his 55-year-old son, Mojtaba, is poised to succeed him. According to Western intelligence sources, Mojtaba has been considered close to his father in recent years, and is deeply involved in the shaping of Iranian internal and foreign policy. including the nuclear program and relations with the Middle East proxies organizations, such as Hezbollah and the Houthis in Yemen. He is understood to be aligned with the most conservative current in the Iranian regime and is seen as following in the footsteps of his father in his hardline stance towards Israel and the West. Now, to further complicate matters, there is significant resistance among Iran's reformist faction to this transfer of power within the family, for obvious reasons. Some Western analysts believe that this internal debate might do severe harm to the internal cohesion of this regime, even as it grapples with many external pressures. In any case, we are at a turning point in this war, and Israel's military strike on some of the regime's most important strategic assets might just be the last nail in the coffin of the Islamic Republic. Now back to Israel, there's a general agreement among the military and intelligence echelon that the regime has no choice but to respond to Israel's strike to avoid appearing weak in front of their many foreign and domestic enemies. Not to mention, of course, their Russian, the Chinese, and the North Korean allies, all of which are looking to see what their response will be. Now, Israel is already preparing for the next round, where all targets will be on the table, which could possibly include some of the nuclear facilities, along with the oil storage and shipment infrastructure that was untouched in this recent attack. Here at TBN Israel, we will continue to update you on the developments going forward. And now, back to Yair Pinto.
Thank you, Mati Shoshani, for the in-depth review on Iran. A second before we move on to what is happening in Lebanon, I want to tell you that this weekend, the latest episode of my series, My State, will be released, in which I joined the IDF forces and entered the Hezbollah tunnels in Lebanon to give you a close-up look at what Hezbollah planned to do and how they thought that they were going to do it. So, click on the subscribe button if you haven't already and stay up to date with everything that is happening in this region so that you can pray for the peace of Jerusalem. But even before you watch that episode, I can tell you some of the details. I recently went up with the IDF forces to explore a Hezbollah command tunnel in Lebanon. The complex was built in a rural area underneath a small village not far from the Israeli border, and it included a huge and incredibly complex but also spacious warren of tunnels stretching almost 1.5 kilometers underground in bunkers built off the connecting tunnels. Massive amounts of weapons and ammunition were kept in storage rooms along with toilets and showers, kitchens and bedrooms. It took Hezbollah 15 years and an unimaginable amount of money to build this tunnel and fill it up with all the things that they need to house the Radwan Force terrorists who were meant to invade Israel and slaughter our citizens. But that won't happen because on Saturday morning, the IDF combat engineers set up almost 400 tons of explosives, pushed a button and blew it all up. The explosion was so massive that it provided the earthquake alert system in the Galilee and northern Samaria with tests, sending messages to residents in 284 communities and villages in Israel to get outdoors immediately to avoid being trapped by collapsing buildings. Shortly after the initial messages were sent out, the Geological Institute sent another message clarifying the situation. The brigade combat team of the paratroopers, under the command of the 98th Division, initially found the underground complex. The 77th Armored Battalion, Gadchan 8219, 8219, the Yalom Combat Engineering Unit, and the Shin Bet all participated in clearing and preparing it for the demolition. Some Hezbollah fighters were located in the course of this activity, and they were quickly eliminated in an exchange of fire with the IDF forces. As I walked through these tunnels, I had a very chilling thought. What might have happened if on October 7th last year, these plans to attack Israel from the north, just as Hamas was attacking in the south, had been put into motion? What might have happened if the residents of these communities, the Israeli communities in the north, had returned prematurely, with the shafts where these terrorists could emerge to slaughter them were just a few meters from their homes? The IDF soldiers I toured the tunnel with told me their mission was to make sure that this could never happen again. One officer told us that I feel that I was able to reach the soft underbelly of the enemy to one of his strategic facilities. We were able to take away from him what he had built for many years. Entering the strategic asset, taking it from him, it's a huge victory. When we get out of here, everything will be destroyed. This is a huge victory. The demolition stage of the operation was technically difficult and somewhat dangerous, and it was carried out by the IDF troops who have a great deal of experience in demolishing tunnels over the last year in Gaza. The results of their work speaks for itself. Here at TBN Israel, we will continue to report on what is happening on the northern border. So please continue spreading the truth by sharing our videos on YouTube and subscribing to this YouTube channel. You can also donate so that we can create more videos just like this one. If you want to support us financially, go to our website at www.tbnisrael.com/give. You can also donate by clicking the donate button here on YouTube. While all this activity is ongoing in Iran and Lebanon, the IDF is still hard at work in the Gaza Strip. 2 days ago, it was reported that the forces entered the Kamal Adwan hospital in Jabalia in the northern Gaza Strip following information that armed operatives of Hamas and the Islamic Jihad were operating from within that facility. According to sources at the hospital, the IDF arrested 44 of the staff members in the compound, after which 14 of them were released. The Ministry of Health in Gaza, run by Hamas, claimed that the IDF forces withdrew from the hospital last night after 1 day. At the same time, the forces of Division 162 continue to operate in the Jabalia area in the northern Gaza Strip, and the IDF spokesman said that in the last day, the forces had eliminated more than 40 terrorists. The Givati fighters operating in the area destroyed terrorist infrastructure and captured stocks of weapons and ammunition. Let's move on to a quick report from Judea and Samaria, where on Saturday, IDF forces eliminated Islam Odeh, a Hamas field commander who was planning to carry out attacks in the immediate time frame in the Palestinian Authority-administered city of Tulkarem. As the IDF troops were closing in on him, Odeh opened fire on them, leading to them returning fire and eliminating him. Weapons and bomb-making materials were found in his vehicles. The IDF, the Shin Bet, and the border police have carried out large-scale security operations in Judea and Samaria in recent months, leading to the arrest and the elimination of large numbers of terrorists and capture of enormous quantities of weapons, cash, narcotics, and other contraband. Here at TBN Israel, we will continue to report on how the IDF is progressing in the Gaza Strip and in Judea and Samaria. We will ask you to continue spreading the truth with us, share and follow us, and take a minute or two to pray for the IDF soldiers. Over the weekend, we lost 13 heroes who died defending our country. I would like to ask you to pray for the strength and for the peace of the IDF soldiers wherever they are stationed, in the air, at the sea, or on the land. Pray for the quick return of the abductees from Gaza back to their houses in Israel. Continue to pray for the safe return of the residents of the north, and most importantly, don't forget to pray for the peace of Jerusalem.